The Titan. This small revolutionary submersible was developed by American company OceanGate to transport wealthy tourists to the world's most famous shipwreck, the Titanic.
The OceanGate Titanic experience. There's truly nothing else like it.
You dreamed about years, and now you are here. This was amazing.
Except that on June 18th, 2023, the adventure turned deadly. Less than 2 hours after its descent, the Titan vanished, with 5 people aboard. Over 4 days, the world held its breath in the hope of finding the passengers alive.
They're stuck in this tiny tin can at the bottom of the ocean, in the cold and in the dark.
I imagined that they were alive inside the submarine and how awful it would be if they weren't found.
It's a bit of a nightmare for everyone on board. You could compare it with the proverbial burying alive.
The terrifying countdown to the tragic ending captured international headlines. The world reeled when debris from the submersible was found near the wreck of the Titanic. What went wrong? Was the disaster caused by a design flaw? Or was it a matter of pilot error?
The submarine can get caught on cables or other parts of the wreck. You may be trapped.
A blackout. The submarine found itself with no electricity, no lights, no communications. That's when its journey to death and destruction began.
Now, through extraordinary archive materials and 3D reconstructions, we are going to recount the tragedy of the Titan and the various scenarios of its ill-fated, deadly descent. Interviews with experts, former passengers, and the victims' families will take you to the bottom of the greatest catastrophe in the history of underwater exploration. It is June 18th in the North Atlantic Ocean. 9:30 a.m. The icebreaker Polar Prince launches a small experimental submersible named Titan into the water.
Roger, platform ready to dive. We are in position.
In 2 hours' time, its 5 passengers have a rendezvous with the Titanic, and they have paid a handsome sum to have the rare privilege of beholding its wreck. Among them, 3 thrill-seeking tourists. Hamish Harding, an American pilot, along with Shahzada Dawood, a Pakistani businessman, and Suleiman, his 19-year-old son. Their tour guide is the world specialist on the Titanic, Frenchman Paul-Henri Najolet.
If he was offered an expedition to the Titanic, that was his priority. It had always been his passion, and I thought it was a nice opportunity for him to go and see the Titanic once again.
Stockton Rush, the Titan's pilot and inventor, completes the crew. However, nothing predestined this millionaire's son to go and inspect the wreck of this famous ocean liner. Because initially, he wanted to become the first man to ever set foot on Mars. But despite having a degree in aerospace engineering under his belt, his dream abruptly came crashing down during a routine medical checkup.
He was found to have eyesight problems, then he came up against a lot of brick walls that he couldn't buy his way through, so he couldn't go to Mars.
So it was through this disappointment that Stockton Rush changed course. He turned to underwater exploration, and right away he set his sights high.
Stockton Rush was someone who very much wanted to be a pioneer in deep ocean technology.
What he wanted was to be recognized as some kind of Leonardo da Vinci of the deep sea. Little by little, he got this idea in his head, that of transforming the depths of the ocean in the same way that Elon Musk and Richard Branson had done with space into a tourist area.
In 2009, Stockton Rush founded OceanGate, a private company that wanted to offer a unique experience for tourists.
The OceanGate Titanic experience. There's truly nothing else like it.
Something never seen before.
He wanted to make his mark on history by creating an inexpensive, efficient submersible that anyone could pilot and which would allow people to visit the wreck of the Titanic and even other wrecks as well.
But to achieve that, he had to design a submersible that would be capable of taking the tourists down to a depth of 3,800 meters, 2.5 times the depth of the Grand Canyon. Another major constraint to take into consideration, the pressure of the depths. Because the final resting place of the Titanic is the most hostile environment on the planet, the abyss. The pressure exerted there is 380 kilos per square centimeter.
The analogy we use is that of a big elephant standing with all 4 feet on a can of soda.
It's just a staggering amount of pressure. It's like God's own hammer, hammering the material over and over again.
And to dive on the Titanic is very much like going into outer space.
And so therefore very few people have been there.
But that didn't stop Stockton Rush. After 10 years of work and the creation of a prototype, he arrived at the final version of this submersible, named Cyclops 2. Following a set of encouraging tests, he decided to change its name.
They changed the name to the Titan.
It was mimicking the Titanic itself, which was claimed to be unsinkable.
Now, an old tradition in the sea is that it is always bad luck to rename a ship.
A bad omen for a pioneering submersible, designed to explore the most famous shipwreck site in the history of commercial sea travel. Approximately 7 meters long by 3 meters wide, the size of a tank, the Titan looked like most other small submarines already in existence. It was equipped with ballasts and weights, just like any other scientific submersible. But the comparisons end there, because Stockton Rush created a vessel that was radically different to anything that existed up until then.
Hi, my name is Stockton Rush. I'm the CEO and founder of OceanGate. Let's take a look at Titan. Best seat in the house. You can look out the viewport. We put a privacy screen in.
Surprisingly, inside there were very few instruments aboard.
We have our control screen here, our sonar screen here.
Compared to a conventional submersible, which has lots of screens, buttons, levers, and so on, there was hardly anything. It looked, to put it bluntly, like a can.
Its cylindrical form was unheard of. Every other exploration submarine has a spherical cabin, so that pressure is exerted evenly on the hull. But this innovation made the Titan the only submarine in the world capable of carrying 5 passengers to 3,800 meters under the water's surface.
5 people is a lot. You wouldn't think, but for a pocket-sized submarine, that's incredible.
To ensure its robustness, Stockton Rush equipped the Titan with a hull made of highly resistant materials. The 2 ends of the submersible were made out of titanium, a virtually indestructible component which had already proved its worth in the deepest depths of the globe. But the central section was made out of a very innovative material.
Stockton Rush chose a revolutionary material because it was light, easy to assemble, and inexpensive: carbon fiber. It is used in the aeronautical and aerospace industry. It has excellent properties, but had never been tested at such depths before.
Even more unconventional, this tourist submersible had a viewport with a diameter of 60 centimeters, 2 times bigger than an airliner. Once again, this was completely unheard of.
To entice the tourists and offer them an unforgettable experience, this viewport would allow them to see the Titanic and almost touch it. The promise of this totally incredible experience was the Titan's main selling point.
But that wasn't all. The Titan's steering controls were also surprising. The height of innovation, its 4 electric thrusters were maneuvered thanks to this accessory, of incredible simplicity for such a vessel.
So if you want to go forward, you press forward. If you want to go back, you go back.
It was a video game controller, like one you'd find for commercial use.
And it's Bluetooth, so I can hand it to anybody. And it's meant for a 16-year-old to throw around.
And Stockton, he boasted about it. It was definitely a bit surprising because on the one hand, it was this revolutionary machine in many ways, and at the same time, there was this DIY MacGyver feel to it, with these objects that you or I could go out and buy.
And it was with this new generation submersible that Stockton Rush launched his project in 2021 with his company, OceanGate. His aim was to offer tourists the opportunity to contemplate the wreck of the most famous ocean liner in the world for the modest sum of $250,000, almost 230,000 euros. A fortune for mere mortals, but a formality for millionaires in search of extraordinary experiences.
Extreme tourism is really growing as a market. That idea of pushing the limits, ordinary people going to the very edges, Everest, space, Antarctic, the bottom of the ocean, the Titanic.
There are actually quite a lot of people who can afford to pay $250,000 to go underwater and see the wreck of the Titanic.
The Titan's first expeditions were a great success. Thanks to Stockton Rush's audacity, you no longer had to be a scientist to go and enjoy a sensational ride around the most mythical of shipwrecks.
Don't miss the opportunity to be part of history. The OceanGate Titanic experience. There's truly nothing else like it.
No one believed in Stockton Rush. When he succeeded in his crazy dream to reach the wreck of the Titanic with his little Titan, everyone shouted, "Wow, the man's a genius!"
Very quickly, the waiting list grew to go aboard what had become a phenomenon, the Titan. Hailing from Las Vegas, property developer Jay Bloom and his son Sean were tempted by the experience.
I'm a little bit of an adrenaline junkie. My son and I normally do a lot of these adventures together when possible.
It wasn't really like a dream or anything. It was more of a bucket list item. It was more like, oh, cool, like, let's go see the Titanic, you know?
Retired businessman, German millionaire Arthur Leubel is also a fan of extreme tourism activities. When he bought his place aboard the Titan, he was indulging himself in fulfilling his childhood dream.
My father told me a lot about when I was a kid, and it's a mythos forever, I think.
In August 2021, he went on the experience. Arthur Leubel documented his dive in Titan and allows us to relive his descent, thanks to these exceptional archives.
When I was inside, you cannot stand. You're sitting 10.5 hours on the bottom. You say, close the Titan from outside.
Other submersibles always have the possibility of being opened from the inside in case of emergency, but not the Titan. The passengers therefore willingly accepted to be locked in by this unique procedure, leaving them at the mercy of an external intervention to get them out if there was any problem. Once it was completely locked shut, Titan was launched into the water. Placed on a floating pontoon, it sank a few meters below the surface. Then the submersible fired up its engines, and the experience began. A sensational dive to the depths of the ocean.
It's special, it's quiet, you hear nothing. You feel pressed and it's black outside, you know you cannot go out.
Throughout history, less than 60 people have had the privilege of experiencing the following moment. According to the information we have available to us, around 40 of them were able to do so thanks to Stockton Rush and his Titan.
Suddenly, you get to the bottom, the projectors light up because visibility is really poor, and in front of you, you discover the wreck of the Titanic.
Hundreds of tons are losing your body. You become happy. You dreamed about years. You paid a lot of money for this, and now you are here. This was amazing.
It is an absolute dream to be able to go down there and see that Grey Lady of the Atlantic in person.
And the show had only just begun. The Titan now sailed around the wreck, getting close up like never before. The extreme tourists needed to get their money's worth.
This wasn't a scientific expedition. The idea was that everyone would be thrilled. Getting close enough to practically touch the Titanic was all part of the experience.
So we have go 2 times around the Titanic, and 2 times we sitting on the deck.
Going over the bridge and seeing where the captain perished and seeing where the lifeboats had been sent into the ocean. And you can just in your own mind think of what it must have been like to be on the ship when it went down.
For me, I had the feeling I am now live 1912 on board because PH was telling us everything.
More than just a guide, Paul-Henri Nargeolet was Mr. Titanic. The French explorer had dived down to the wreck almost 40 times as submarine pilot for Ifremer, the French National Institute for Ocean Science and Technology. Thanks to him, more than 5,000 objects from the ocean liner have been brought back up to the surface and keep the memory of the shipwreck alive.
The Titanic was like his big brother. That's how it was. Sometimes I was a little jealous because I said to myself, he prefers to spend more time with the Titanic than his family.
Paul-Henri Nargeolet couldn't have imagined that the wreck of the Titanic would become his tomb. Sunday, June 18th, 2023. It's 9:30 a.m. Back to the Titan with its 5 passengers on board.
Roger, platform, ready to dive.
In 2 hours' time, Stockton Rush, Paul-Henri Nargeolet, Hamish Harding, Shahzada, and Suleiman Dawood have a rendezvous with the Titanic.
They begin all the usual procedures. Everything seems perfectly ordinary. They've done this plenty of times before.
Number 1 requirement when you dive in a deep ocean submersible. There is one. You come back. Other than that, everything is secondary.
As the capsule closes, they don't know that their fate is sealed and that they have just signed their own death warrant.
Titan ultimately disappears beneath the waves. One person takes a photograph. It's a nice little souvenir, but nothing particularly remarkable. They're following the descent. And then suddenly there's silence. That's never a good thing.
One and 3/4 hours into the dive, Polar Prince, the Titan's mothership, loses contact with the submersible. It's not the first time that this has happened. The OceanGate team on the boat tried to restore communication by all possible means.
Radio waves do not travel through water. So they're using acoustics, they're using transponders. Some of this is direct messaging. Communication has obviously gone wrong, so they're aware that something is up.
On the previous occasions when they had lost contact with the Titan, it had reappeared a few hours later. But after 8 hours without any sign of life coming from the submersible, something is up. There is growing concern.
That is a long amount of time which they're waiting, knowing that something is wrong, but unable to help.
The expedition team leaders have no other choice but to call for help and alert the Coast Guard. The news is immediately made public by the media. In just a few hours, Titan's name circles the globe.
Tonight, near the site of one of the 20th century's worst ocean disasters, a new undersea drama is unfolding.
Correm contra o tempo para encontrar o submarino que simplesmente desapareceu.
Ce petit sous-marin, il y avait 5 personnes à son bord.
Eksperymentalnej łodzi podwodnej Titan.
El Titan. Sí, Titan.
Y otra cosa es que el sumergible.
Teams hätten mehrfach Klopfgeräusche.
A mí me gustaría, Antonio.
It was everywhere. It was inescapable. It was on every news channel. It was all over social media.
The eyes of the world were upon Titan. The world stopped.
Antoine Lard, en enregistrement direct de Washington. Alors, ce qu'on sait, c'est que ce sous-marin était en train de descendre vers l'épave du Titanic. Comme ça concerne le Titanic.
Being linked to the Titanic, it went global. Everyone was interested. There was even this on-screen countdown with the seconds, minutes, and hours ticking away, and people were glued to their screens.
Scotchés devant leur télé.
The faces of the Titan's 5 occupants were broadcast across the world. Sidonie Narjolet is Paul-Henri Narjolet's daughter. She remembers the moment when she heard the news.
It was completely surreal for me. I was telling myself it was my dad, and that nothing could happen to him. It was impossible.
What happened aboard the Titan? In the first few hours of its disappearance, many theories were flying around. Was it drifting somewhere on the surface? Or stuck at the bottom of the ocean? The entire planet was imagining the nightmare that its occupants would be going through if they were stuck in this little submersible in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean.
If a submarine doesn't come up to the surface in 24 hours, then you have a problem. A big problem.
We're going to bring them back. You always have to have that hope. You don't give up.
After 8 hours without any news, there is still a real hope of finding them alive. But time is of the essence. Because the 5 passengers have oxygen reserves to last them 4 days, that's 96 hours. If they aren't rescued by then, they could die of asphyxiation.
We are waiting, tick-tock, tick-tock, as the oxygen runs out, and we wait for some news from the Titan that doesn't come. These are all ingredients of a horror film. Actually, a scriptwriter could have written this film.
The clock is ticking down, and this is an absolutely immovable deadline.
Monday, June 19th. The Titan disappeared 24 hours ago. The U.S. Coast Guard is leading the rescue operation. At this point, there are many possibilities. The Titan could very well be stuck at the bottom of the ocean or have come back up to the surface with no way of communicating its position.
Much like an earthquake situation, speed is the utmost urgency. Those first few hours, the best opportunity to actually find people to get them okay.
American and Canadian military planes are patrolling above the ocean, trying to spot Titan on the ocean surface. Finding it is a huge challenge because the search area is gigantic.
20,000 square kilometers with a depth of 4,000 meters. It will be easier to find a grain of sand in a haystack. It's very, very difficult. They even asked airlines who were flying over the area to keep an eye out in case they saw the Titan on the surface.
It is white. If it was yellow or red, it would be easier to find, but that's not the case. With the white clouds and the foam of the waves, that makes it extremely hard to spot.
It's a Titanic mission, and its correct execution could have decisive consequences on the lives of the passengers. In this first scenario, they would be trapped inside the Titan, locked in from the outside, even though they can see daylight.
I was very afraid of them being alive, but of knowing coming to their rescue. I was scared, above all, that they would run out of oxygen.
But there is no trace of the Titan at the surface. In the meantime, the rescuers are attempting to probe the ocean depths in the area around the wreck of the Titanic. To do so, they have a formidable tool at their disposal, the sonar buoy. They act as the ears of the sea rescue team.
A sonar buoy is basically used to listen to what's happening beneath the sea's surface and to pick up sounds that could potentially detect the Titan.
These highly powerful military devices are capable of detecting sound within a radius of several kilometers. Rescuers drop these sonar buoys in the hope of finding a sign of life given off by the Titan and its occupants. But after a day's searching, there is still no trace of the submersible in distress. The morning of Tuesday, June 20th. The Titan only has 51 hours of oxygen remaining.
We imagine the anguish of these people who are trapped at the bottom of the ocean in this tiny vessel, who know that after 4 days, they'll have no more oxygen left.
45 hours after the loss of contact with the OceanGate submersible, ships finally arrive in the area after their long journey from the continent to try and locate the Titan. Coast Guard and military vessels, as well as civilian and industrial ships, have responded to the call for help.
People want to believe that this crew is alive. That is why everyone is so energized and also spending tens of millions of dollars to try and save the Titan's crew.
With so many searches, I said to myself, there has to be hope. People believe that we can find them and they are okay.
This rescue operation monopolizes news channels around the entire world. It's against this backdrop that one theory begins to gain traction. And the thought is terrifying. The Titan could be trapped in the wreck of the Titanic at a depth of 3,800 meters, with billions of cubic meters of water above their heads.
I dove on the Titanic in 2019, and I have no intention of going back. And I will say it was the most dangerous dive that I've ever done, because the currents can be unpredictable and push you into the wreck. The submarine can get caught on cables or other parts of the wreck. You may be trapped.
The possibility of such a scenario is chilling. But at the Coast Guard headquarters in Boston, it is being seriously considered. So how can they find out?
At that point, the rescuers are blind with no idea what's happening underneath the water.
There is no other option. They will have to dive down to the wreck of the Titanic to search for them. But for logistical reasons, that is no easy task.
There are so few manned submersibles that can go down to 4,000 meters. More like about, and most of them are not in operation any longer, and most were not in that location.
However, there is a solution: underwater robots.
Remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs. That's where you have a pilot looking through the camera in the ROV, piloting it, and it has manipulators so it can actually do things.
As luck would have it, two of them are available: the American rover, Odysseus 6K, and the French robot 6000 from Ifremer. However, they are far away from the search area. They are urgently transported to the North Atlantic Ocean. Their estimated arrival is Thursday at dawn, but time is running out. If the Titan's crew is still alive, they will have less than 4 hours of oxygen remaining by then.
When the robots get there, the rescuers will finally be able to see what's going on in the wreckage of the Titanic and then potentially find the Titan.
These sophisticated pieces of technology are the rescuers' best chance of finding Titan and its 5 passengers. Meanwhile, the U.S. Coast Guard holds a press conference from their headquarters in Boston.
Is a deep-sea rescue a realistic prospect? What would that look like?
Well, I can't tell you exactly what it would look like. I would tell you that, we are out there, we're searching and putting all effort out there.
Normally, Americans are always very optimistic, but not this time.
Despite an intensive 3-day search, the Titan can't be found. For their families, each hour that goes by without any news of their loved ones brings more heartbreak.
There were difficult moments when I thought, is it over? And then others when it was, no, you have to believe it might be okay.
Wednesday, June 21st. The Titan disappeared 3 days ago. If its 5 passengers are still alive at this stage, they have less than 20 hours of oxygen remaining. But just as all hope appears to be lost, there is some good news. One of the sonar buoys picks up a signal.
Noises start being heard, bangs coming from somewhere beneath the sea.
Muffled sounds, and above all, ones that are repeated every half an hour. And that points to these sounds potentially being made by humans.
While the Coast Guard attempts to formally identify the sounds, the experts highlight the presence of one man in particular aboard the Titan, Paul-Henri Nagelet. In such a critical situation, this formal naval officer and experienced diver is the man for the job. He could be behind such signals.
My father was always calm in a crisis situation. He was someone who didn't give up, who knew what he wanted and who could find the way to get there. We thought, that's a very good sign.
If you're in a submersible, stranded, trying to contact the surface and you had no communications, that absolutely is something one would do, which is to bang with a tool on metal, because that sound would travel a very great distance. But most importantly, you would do it very precisely and regularly.
The entire world is hanging on to these banging sounds. What if it is them?
They've been looking for the crew for 3 days, and we imagine the worst. But when we hear these sounds from the bottom of the ocean, we think, that's it. We found the crew of the Titan.
And from there, all of a sudden, the story is all over the news.
So we want to bring you a breaking update on that missing sub.
It's been confirmed that banging sounds have been heard.
Suenan de forma rítmica.
Less than 20 hours now left of air.
Faut absolument rester optimiste et se battre jusqu'au bout.
But this hopeful scenario also implies a horrific prospect, being locked in a tiny space down in the abyss. If the Titan's passengers are alive, they have been going through a living nightmare these past 3 days.
They are stuck in this tiny tin can at the bottom of the sea, in the cold and in the dark. And they know that they only have 24 hours of oxygen left. Each minute that passes is taking them closer to their deaths, so it's horrific.
It's a bit of a nightmare for everyone on board. You could compare it with the proverbial burying alive.
You can imagine that some of them are suffering from stress, suffocation, hygiene problems.
More serious than that is actually how cold it can get. The passengers on the Titan, if they were still alive, would actually have hypothermia. They would freeze to death before they ran out of oxygen.
With this in mind, the rescuers are pulling out all the stops as the final deadline approaches. If the crew isn't saved before 9:30 a.m. the next day, any chance of finding them alive will be wiped out. Thursday, June 22nd at dawn. It's as if time has stopped on the Titan's oxygen reserve countdown. 4 hours. In the best-case scenario, that's what remains for the Titan and its crew.
It would go right down to the wire, maybe, because the clock was still ticking. But that's it. We were going to get them back.
Even if there was some chance that they were still alive, people really wanted to believe it.
When Odysseus, the underwater robot, finally reaches the area, hope is rekindled. At 5:30 a.m., it begins its descent towards the wreck of the Titanic, to where the banging heard the day before was pinpointed. The whole world has its eyes riveted on this underwater robot. But it has to complete this formidable challenge in record time, because finding the Titan in this hostile environment seems to be mission impossible.
This is the 15-square-mile wreck of the Titanic, and a lot of that debris is bigger than the Titan. So this isn't looking for a needle in a haystack. This is looking for a needle in a needle stack.
Odysseus is steered from the surface on a pilot ship. So you have a crew that are viewing on the screen what the camera of Odysseus sees.
It spends a long time searching in the vicinity of where the sounds were picked up by the sonar buoy. In vain. Until the countdown timer stops.
There was this weird moment when we knew that time had run out, that the countdown had finished, and that at that point the Titan's passengers had no more oxygen left. With all our colleagues there on the docks, in front of the Coast Guard team, we looked at each other and said, "What's going on? That's it. It's over. We won't find them." But there was no announcement. And for an hour or two, we stayed like that, waiting. We were wondering what was going on.
At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Boston time, on Thursday, June 22nd, the news breaks.
We're going to go straight to breaking news concerning that search for a submersible. Big debris field was discovered within the search area by one of the rovers near the Titanic.
Il n'y a donc ce soir plus aucun espoir de retrouver des survivants.
The wreckage makes it absolutely plain, but the worst possible outcome has happened. They find individual portions of the outside of the submersible and the broken up carbon fiber body. Tragically, there are no survivors.
Suleiman and Shahzada Dawood, Hamish Harding, Paul-Henri Narjolet, and Stockton Rush, the Titan's inventor, are all dead. Ocean Gate's submersible was supposed to allow them to fulfill their dream. It has become their casket.
That's when I said to myself that I would never see him again. And yes, It's still difficult to think that.
This is the grim epilogue to an unprecedented rescue operation with its many twists and turns, which for a long time prolonged the hope of finding them alive. These knocking sounds picked up in the ocean were just a false alarm.
The noises were not Titan. In fact, more ironically, a lot of them were actually Titanic. As the wreck slowly deteriorates, the deep-sea currents are gently moving things.
After this tragedy, it was time for the questions. What had happened? Was this tragedy a predictable outcome? Several alarming signs suggest so. Because while some wealthy tourists had fulfilled their dreams of seeing the Titanic with their own eyes, the expeditions of the Titan weren't all great successes. Far from it. In reality, during the 3 years that the submersible had been in operation, the majority of the dives didn't even reach their destination.
Out of 90 dives, 13 reached the Titanic. That means that this was a complicated expedition, which wasn't always successful. In fact, it was rarely successful.
Technical problems that meant that missions had to be aborted on a regular basis. Loss of contact with the surface, failure of the onboard computer or the sonar, and even loss of control of the submersible.
A communications problem is really a big technical worry because it renders the Titan blind, both for resurfacing and for moving about over the ocean floor.
It was a dive before my dive. The battery system failed, and they have no energy, so they have to make an emergency dive up. But what exactly the reason was, they don't tell us.
As a result, passengers who had paid for their descent were obliged to come back up to the surface without having seen the Titanic. As well as having been frightened by their experience, they weren't always refunded by OceanGate. The result? Through word of mouth, fewer and fewer people wanted to board the Titan.
In my opinion, it was a disaster for commercial. I was talking with him after the dive. I said, "You have so many dives and not working, that's not good for commercial." And he said, yes, his shareholder are not very happy at the moment. And also he was asking me, maybe, are you interested to be a shareholder from us? But that's nothing for me.
Stockton came to see me in Las Vegas. He was really pushing hard for us to go. He assured me that it was safer than flying a helicopter or scuba diving, and I told him that my son had some safety concerns.
I actually found that video of Stockton explaining how the submarine was controlled with that game controller.
So if you want to go
and I asked Stockton about it, and he got mad at me when I asked the questions, and he texted my dad that I was misinformed. So ultimately, I just told my dad, I'm like, yeah, we're just not gonna go because this guy is out of his mind.
Faced with this kind of attitude, Stockton Rush knew that his company's success was in jeopardy. He would do whatever it took to convince Jay and Sean Bloom.
To the point where he offered me a $100,000 discount for each of us. So instead of $250 a person, it would be $150 a person.
And we were just like, bro, like that's not the problem here, you know? No, he was definitely struggling to sell those tickets, and then unfortunately he found people that bought him. It was another father and son that took our place, those specific tickets.
This father and son were Shahzada and Suleiman Dawood. They weren't worried about the submersible's reliability, and they paid the full price to be part of the expedition. Just like Hamish Harding.
One of my friends, Hamish Harding, died, and I told him not to get in that submersible, but each individual has to make their own decision.
However, a form could have dissuaded them at the last minute.
Before going aboard, they had to sign a discharge in which the risk of death is mentioned 3 times on the first page.
A mere formality or a prophetic document? Ever since the Titan was built, various underwater explorers were convinced that people would die. Some directly warned Stockton Rush, but he refused to listen to them.
We routinely said that he was going to kill people, and he disagreed.
I know the Navy, the U.S. Navy raised the issues. Bob Ballard raised the issues. James Cameron raised the issues with him. He was not receptive to constructive criticism. You either agreed with him or he wasn't interested in what you had to say.
Worse still, when in 2018, the director of marine operations of OceanGate, David Lockridge, sounded the alarm and pointed out reliability issues with the Titan prototype, in particular with the viewport glass. The reaction of his boss, Stockton Rush, was categorical.
Stockton Rush brushed aside all of Lockridge's comments and fired Lockridge, and even said to him, "You're no longer in line with the company's philosophy. You're out of here."
And even worse than that, Stockton Rush also decided to free himself from any certification for his submersible, something which is like a crash test for every submarine.
Certification companies send engineers and inspectors to check that materials, safety systems, and components meet specific safety parameters. The Titan wasn't approved, and for a submarine, that is unacceptable.
Stockton Rush knew that his Titan would not pass any safety tests required for certification. But the CEO of OceanGate didn't care. He knew that where he was going, there were no laws that bound him.
Titanic is in international waters. If you've got the equipment and the money to go out there, then why not? Nobody's really going to be able to stop you if you really are prepared to push the boundaries.
Stockton Rush was therefore ready to take every risk, right up until this final dive on June 18th, 2023, which would make the Titan known to the world in the worst possible way. A few hours after the debris had been discovered, the mystery remained intact. What had really happened aboard that day? On the docks of Boston, journalists were on tenterhooks waiting for the first pieces of information.
We wanted to know what had happened. We wanted to know how they had died, in what circumstances.
My father didn't have a death wish. People ask me why he went in the submarine. He believed in that submarine.
The final press conference of the Coast Guard would provide the first piece of the puzzle.
The debris is consistent with the catastrophic loss of the pressure chamber.
And he explained that the Titan had imploded during its descent.
An implosion is the opposite of an explosion. This external pressure wanted to get inside and crushed everything.
From the initial findings of the investigation, the experts believe that this implosion would have likely occurred at the moment that communication was cut, 1 3/4 hours after the dive began. But for an implosion to occur, that means there must have been a fault in the cabin. So where did it come from? Attention soon turned to the viewport. And David Lockridge, the former director of operations for OceanGate who was fired by Stockton Rush, was on everyone's minds.
We knew that these problems could be caused by the acrylic panes, which could split and crack.
Could the viewport have caved in under the pressure and caused the implosion? Not necessarily, because another element of the Titan was on the radar of all the experts: the component used for the hull.
Il est fait de fibrocarbone.
Ein Zylinder ist aus Carbonfasern.
A carbon fiber, kind of an experimental craft.
So it's a very unconventional design, and I must confess that I was very concerned. Imagine a rope. A rope is very strong when you pull it, but it's not at all strong when you push it together. Carbon fiber is somewhat similar. It's great under tension, but not under compression. And when carbon fiber fails, it fails catastrophically. It doesn't bend or warp, it just snaps.
Could that be what happened? At this point, nothing can confirm that. But if that is the case, it offers some comfort to the families. Because a sudden implosion, however catastrophic that may be, means that the victims wouldn't have suffered.
It happened faster than the brain could even recognize what is happening.
An implosion is a horrible idea, but at least it's fast.
But not everyone agrees with this theory. Spanish engineer and submariner José Luis Martín puts forward another surprising hypothesis. According to him, the final minutes of the Titan's passengers would have been a journey through hell.
Something new had to have happened for this accident to occur.
It all began with a meteorological coincidence. The day that the Titan disappeared, the ocean current of the Gulf Stream was especially strong.
There was an incredibly powerful storm. The Atlantic was at its peak, with its waters churning in full force.
And so, according to José Luis Martín, the pilot would have forced the engines to ensure its descent, and so caused the batteries to drastically overheat. This inevitably resulted in a catastrophic failure.
A blackout. The submarine found itself with no electricity, no lights, no communications. The pilot was unable to activate any electrical safety system. That's when its journey to death and destruction began.
In this scenario, the Titan would have just been a dead weight at the mercy of gravity. Without any power for its engines, it would have lost its stability and tipped up, pushing the passengers to the front of the submersible.
Imagine that they are all piled up on top of one another. Imagine the feeling of fear, of terror, and of panic. I think it's the worst thing that somebody could experience. And in my opinion, at that point, they realized that these were their final moments alive.
Helpless, the passengers would have plunged in these conditions toward the depths of the North Atlantic Ocean. According to the Spanish engineer, the Titan would have sunk straight into the abyss at a rate of 22 meters per second, or 80 kilometers an hour, which is 20 times faster than on a normal dive.
It couldn't withstand an increase of around 100 kilos per square centimeter in less than a minute. That is more than enough to crush the hull of any submarine.
And according to José Luis Martín, the submersible would have been subjected to this huge increase in pressure during 52 seconds. 52 nightmarish seconds for the passengers and crew members, which would have resulted in the loss of any submersible. Inevitably, it imploded. But as terrible as this scenario is, could it have really happened? It is difficult to confirm while the investigation is still ongoing.
There have been horrific scenarios put forward. I think that people wanted to make a name for themselves by inventing theories out of nowhere. Personally, I believe that they didn't see it coming, and that they were there, happy, saying to themselves that they were going to see the Titanic. That's what I tell myself.
5 days after the discovery of the Titan's debris, human remains were brought to the surface with the aid of the robots. A final consolation for these families who needed to start the grieving process.
They managed to get their DNA, so they should be sending us things that have their DNA. But we don't know when, and we don't know what that is. And it's not nice to imagine what it could be.
Other pieces of debris from the Titan, some parts of which remain almost intact, have also been recovered. Analyzed by experts, they will offer precious clues to answer the questions on everyone's lips. If the Titan imploding is the most likely scenario, what caused it? Would the passengers have been aware that they were going to die? And above all, since Stockton Rush died with his creation, who will have to assume responsibility for this tragedy?
Who is responsible for these 5 deaths? Who didn't do their job properly?
Son travail.
Unlike aircraft, there's no black box, there's no data recorders for the Titan submersible. The investigation will come to solid, definite scientific conclusions, but it's got its work cut out for it.
It will undoubtedly take several years before the investigators deliver their findings. Will the Ocean Gate Company and its owner, Stockton Rush, be found guilty of serious safety breaches?
Complaints have been filed. There will be trials, that's for sure.
The commercial aspects caused them to have safety protocols that weren't as stringent as they needed to be.
It was inevitable that the Titan would implode.
This tragedy will long be remembered. The whole world followed the unbearable suspense of the search, in the hope of finding the Titan's passengers safe and sound. But there was no happy ending. More than a century after it sank, the Titanic had just claimed 5 new victims.
I feel horrible for the father and son that ended up going, and it's crazy because we were very, very close to going on that trip. Like, thank God we didn't go.
One final consolation for Paul-Henri Nargeolet's daughter. Her father would have lived his passion for the Titanic to the very end.
My father had an extraordinary life. He was happy to be going to see the Titanic one more time. For him, it would have been a good way to die. But for me, as we don't have a body, there are still times when I think, maybe he'll come back. I don't know.
While there are still thrill seekers out there, extreme tourism will have a bright future ahead of it.
I have a ticket to space by Richard Branson, and it should be working maybe next year. From the deep to the space, yeah.
It all comes down to money. It all comes down to someone who's willing to do it.
If Elon Musk said, hey, do you want to go on a ride? I'd say sure. But with all due respect, if you invited me to go on a rocket ship that you built in your backyard, I would probably decline.
Other people want to build submarines for tourists, and I think that it's a good idea to do that. We shouldn't close the door of the ocean to tourists just because there was an accident.
More than a century after the Titanic sank, and at the cost of 5 more human lives, the tragedy of the Titan echoes the fate of the ocean liner that was believed to be unsinkable. When man defies nature, he sometimes has to pay the price.